She was divorced, homeless, almost invisible to the world, with nothing left. Anna Barlow spent her last dollar on an abandoned house no one else wanted. The place was condemned, forgotten, marked for demolition. But what she found inside that abandoned house wasn't just decay or emptiness. It was a hidden story, quietly preserved, waiting for someone who would stay. Before we begin, if you believe even the most forgotten places can still matter, subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. After her divorce left her untethered and financially drained, Anna Barlow, 42, found herself navigating a world she barely recognized. The once comfortable life she had in a cozy suburb outside Chicago had dissolved into a series of couch surfing nights and tense job interviews, with no children and few friends left in the area. She packed what little she had into the back of her aging sedan and began driving south. Not knowing exactly where she was headed, she ended up in Benton Harbor, Michigan, drawn by an online listing for an abandoned house that the city was practically giving away. $1. That was the asking price, and no one wanted it. The house stood on a quiet, crumbling street, boarded windows, overgrown lawn, and a door that seemed more ceremonial than functional. But Anna didn't see a haunted house. She saw a last chance. It was a chance to rebuild on her own terms. She didn't expect much. The city had marked it for demolition, but she signed the papers anyway. It was a place to sleep, a place to be invisible, and for someone who had been reduced to just surviving, that was enough. Anna Barlow spent her first night in the house, wrapped in 2 blankets, lying on an old army cot she had brought with her. The air smelled like mildew and rust. Rain tapped gently against the boarded-up windows, and the occasional groan of the old wooden beams reminded her that the house had been abandoned longer than anyone cared to remember. The next morning, she walked through the rooms slowly, not with excitement, but with caution, like stepping into someone else's past. The front room had peeling floral wallpaper and a collapsed ceiling corner. A tarnished light fixture dangled by a single wire. She noticed remnants of another life, a child's shoe, a rusted tricycle, a stack of yellowed newspapers from 1989. In the kitchen, the cabinets hung crooked on their hinges. Most were empty. One still held a single mug with a faded cartoon owl. It made her pause longer than she thought she would. There was something about that mug, its stubborn presence, the way it clung to the past that mirrored how she felt. As she cleaned, she found herself humming. Not because she was happy, but because the silence was starting to feel too heavy. Later that afternoon, while removing debris from a back hallway she hadn't noticed the day before, Anna found a narrow door partially hidden behind a large, warped shelving unit. It wasn't marked on the floor plan the city had provided. The door was low and plain, without a handle, just a circular hole where a knob once was. She hesitated. Her instinct told her to leave it. Just keep cleaning. Just keep surviving. But there was a kind of stillness in that hallway, a pressure, not threatening, but not welcoming either. She knelt down and pulled at the door. It groaned open slowly, revealing a set of wooden stairs leading downward. The smell changed. It was no longer just dust and damp wood. It was older, denser, almost earthy. Anna stood at the top of the stairs for a long time, long enough for the light outside to shift. The basement was dark, but she could make out faint outlines, something that looked like a desk. A box. And was that wallpaper? Grabbing her phone for a flashlight, she stepped down. Each creak of the step beneath her feet felt like entering a memory, not her own. The air grew cooler with every descent. When she reached the bottom, she expected to find a typical, unfinished basement cement floor, maybe old tools, maybe signs of mold. But what she found was different. The space was finished, but not recently. It looked like a room that had been untouched since the early 90s. A small desk sat against the far wall, covered in dust but surprisingly intact. A rotary phone rested on it, its cord coiled tightly. Beside it was a stack of notebooks, their covers warped with age. There was an old armchair with a faded plaid cushion and a wooden cabinet with glass panels. Inside the cabinet were several jars, each neatly labeled, filled with what appeared to be dried herbs, buttons, marbles, coins, even feathers. Odd, personal, curated. But what caught Anna's eye was the wall behind the armchair. Pasted onto it was a collage of newspaper clippings, photographs, and handwritten notes. Yellowed tape held the edges in place. Some of the articles were about local disappearances. Others mentioned strange sightings in the neighborhood figures in the orchard. Unexplained sounds. Lights flickering at the same time every year. At the center of the collage was a photograph of a woman, maybe in her 50s, standing in front of the same house Anna now owned. The name Edith Langley was scribbled beneath the photo. Anna didn't know who Edith was, or why this wall existed, but something about the careful arrangement, the deliberate preservation, it didn't feel like paranoia. It felt like someone trying to remember something everyone else forgot. She touched the edge of the photo gently. The moment she did, a loose clipping fluttered to the ground. It was an obituary, half-torn, with only a portion legible. Beloved local librarian, survived by no immediate family. Funeral unattended. Anna sat in the armchair without realizing she had done so. Her heart wasn't racing. There was no sudden shock, just a slow, tightening quiet inside her. She wasn't afraid. She was curious. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Anna lay awake on her cot upstairs, her thoughts circling around the strange room below. The face of Edith Langley lingered in her mind, calm, unsmiling, almost watching. There was something about that basement, something that didn't belong in a house everyone else had given up on. At around 2:17, Anna heard the first sound. It was faint, like the rustle of paper being turned, or something brushing against a wall. She sat up, holding her breath. The wind a mouse. Nothing in this place had been quiet since the day she arrived, but this felt intentional. She stepped into the hallway. The house was darker than usual, the boarded-up windows letting in only thin slivers of streetlight. Still barefoot. She crept toward the kitchen. That's when she heard it again. A low creak, this time from the basement door. Anna froze. The door had remained open since earlier, but now it was slightly more ajar than before, barely noticeable, but not how she had left it. A cold draft lifted a corner of the nearby curtain, and for the first time in days, she felt something she hadn't let herself feel. Unease. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped onto the stairs once more. The old wood groaned under her weight. As she descended, the temperature dropped, and with it came a subtle scent lavender, aged paper, and something faintly metallic. The room was unchanged. The collage still hung on the wall. The rotary phone, the chair, the cabinet, everything was in its place. Except the notebooks. Earlier, they had been stacked on the desk, dusty and untouched. Now, the top one was open. A single sentence was scrawled across the page. In faded ink. She's still here. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what disturbed her more, the words, or the suggestion that something, had written them since she last left the room. She checked the corners. Nothing. The door at the top of the stairs was still ajar. The street outside silent. She wasn't being watched. At least, not in the usual way. She picked up the notebook. Its pages were filled with entries, some dated, some not. They were written by hand. Same pen, same hurried loops and tight spacing. Some entries detailed strange dreams. Others mentioned the same names again and again. Marla, Jonas, Redfield Avenue. One entry stood out. It knocks only after never before. Never twice. If you hear it, do not open. Anna flipped the page. It was blank. The knock came at 3:04, a single hollow thud, not from the front door, not from above. It came from below. She turned off the flashlight, instinctively. The dark now felt protective. She backed slowly up the stairs, her pulse quick but steady. It wasn't fear. Not yet. It was awareness. Something in this house was responding to her presence, or perhaps resuming something it had long waited to continue. She closed the basement door and wedged a chair against it, not because she believed in ghosts, but because it was easier than admitting she didn't know what she believed anymore. The following morning, Anna returned to the basement in daylight. Nothing had moved, no signs of forced entry. The words in the notebook remained, unchanged. She examined the jars in the cabinet more closely this time. The labels weren't just casual tags, they were names, some etched, some written with what looked like the same tight handwriting from the journal. One jar said Jonas. Inside was a small coin and a single strip of plaid fabric. Another said Marla. Inside dried petals and a silver ring. These weren't random keepsakes. They were intentional, preserved. Who had they belonged to? Why were they here? And what did she still hear really mean? That night, Anna didn't go back to the basement. But she did begin to write. She pulled out one of her own empty notebooks, one she'd been carrying for years but never used, and began documenting what she had seen. She sketched the jars. She copied the entries. She wrote about the knock. There was a strange calm in the act, a sense of duty not to solve a mystery, but to remember it, to give shape to something no one else had thought worth preserving. She didn't hear the knock again, but a new sound began the following night. Soft scratching under the floorboards, beneath her cot. Not aggressive, not frantic, just persistent. By the fourth day, something in Anna had shifted. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like an acceptance, an unspoken agreement between her and the house. She no longer tiptoed through its narrow halls. She moved quietly, but not cautiously. She had begun to greet the space as she entered it out loud, softly, like she would an old friend. Morning. She'd whisper to the dusty kitchen as light filtered through the cracks in the boards. Still here, she'd murmur when descending into the basement. The scratching beneath the floor never grew louder, never stopped. But now she didn't recoil from it. She listened. One morning, while sweeping debris from the small front parlor, she found a warped floorboard near the fireplace. Something about the way the light hit the edge made her pause. She pried it up gently with the claw end of a hammer. Beneath it, she found an old envelope yellowed and sealed with wax. No name, no markings. Inside was a single piece of stationery, neatly folded. On it, written in that same tight cursive, was a line. To remember is to anchor. To forget is to disappear. She sat on the floor and stared at it for a long time. The house wasn't just decaying, it was resisting erasure. Someone, perhaps Edith Langley. Perhaps someone before her had tried to preserve more than just space. They'd tried to preserve memory, and now Anna was part of that effort. Whether she chose to be or not, she started spending more time in the basement, cataloging the jars. She cleaned them gently with a damp cloth and made a list in her notebook name. Contents, condition. She wasn't sure why. It just felt necessary. One jar at the very back of the cabinet had no label. Inside it was only dust. And a small key. Unlike the others, this jar was warm to the touch when she picked it up just faintly, like it had been sitting in someone's palm minutes before. She turned the key over in her hand. Brass, old, delicately ornate. But there was no lock in the basement, none in the house that matched. That night, she dreamed of a corridor that didn't exist, lined with bookshelves and whispers, the walls flickering like candlelight. She walked through it barefoot, holding the key. At the far end was a door with no handle. As she reached out, the door opened not inward, but outward, as if welcoming her. She woke up with her hands clasped to her chest, still curled around the key. Something else had changed, too. She began to feel watched, but not in the ominous way she'd feared before. It was more like a presence that was relieved. Relieved she hadn't left. Relieved someone had finally stayed. The old rotary phone on the basement desk rang once. Just once. Not a full ring, just a single sharp chirp that echoed through the stillness. Anna stared at it. The line wasn't connected. She had checked. The cord didn't even lead to a wall outlet, it simply vanished behind a panel that led nowhere. She picked up the receiver. Silence. Not even a dial tone. She set it down gently and whispered, "I hear you." She didn't know who she was speaking to, but it felt right. By the end of the week, Anna had stopped referring to the place as the house. In her notebook, in her thoughts, she now called it Edith's home. And in some small, unspoken way, she began to believe it might one day be hers. Too, not in the legal sense, but something deeper. The act of remembering, of cleaning, of observing it felt like a kind of inheritance. Not of property, but of purpose. She was no longer just escaping her own past. She was now carrying someone else's forward. On the 7th night, the scratching stopped. It was replaced by a knock. Not from the basement. Not from the front door. This time, it came from inside the hallway closet. The one she hadn't opened since moving in. Anna stood before the hallway closet for a long time. The knock hadn't come again. Just that single, unmistakable sound, 3 gentle raps, spaced evenly, as if someone on the other side had all the time in the world. It was a narrow closet, just a shallow, paneled door with a rusted knob. She had dismissed it early on as likely empty or swollen shut. Until now, it had felt insignificant. Now, it pulsed with attention. When she finally turned the knob, it gave with a reluctant click. The door opened inward, revealing nothing out of the ordinary. At first, just coats moth-eaten, long forgotten, a pair of galoshes, an umbrella warped from age. But something hung in the air. A faint scent, lavender and old paper, the same as the basement. And tucked behind the coats, against the back wall, was a slim wooden panel, almost like a dumbwaiter door, but narrower. Anna reached forward. The panel moved with a gentle push, swinging open to reveal a dark crawl space, just large enough for someone to fit inside on hands and knees. She didn't hesitate. She crawled in. The space was silent and close. Her phone flashlight illuminated scrawls on the inside of the walls writing, "Everywhere." Names, dates, short phrases like, "Don't forget me," and "I was here." Some scratched into the wood, others written in pencil, faded nearly to invisibility. It was a record of presence, of people who had passed through this house, or perhaps had stayed long enough to become part of it. Halfway in, Anna saw something tucked into the far corner, a small wooden box, like a recipe tin. Inside were cards, dozens of them, each hand-labeled. She shuffled through them. Jonas, 1964, stayed 3 weeks, heard the same knocking. Marla, 1978, lived in the attic, dreamt of voices. Kenneth, 1982, found the same jar, left it behind. At the back of the box was a card that stopped her breath. Cold. Anna, 2023. Came alone, stayed anyway. Her name in her handwriting, but she had never written this. She checked the card again. No mistaking it. The loops, the slant of the A, it was hers, but aged. The ink had already begun to yellow. She sat in the crawl space, surrounded by the quiet, and felt the weight of something she couldn't name. Was it a warning? A message? Or something else entirely? That evening, she brought the box downstairs into the basement. She placed it on the desk next to the rotary phone. Then, slowly, she took a blank card from her own notebook and copied the names into her journal. One by one, line by line. This wasn't just a house. It was a ledger of those who came, of those who listened, and of those who chose to stay. The following morning, Anna was in the backyard, clearing some overgrowth near the back fence when she uncovered a stone marker, flat, cracked. At first she thought it was a forgotten grave, but as she brushed away the soil, she saw something stranger. Not a name, not a date, just a symbol, 2 concentric circles with a single dot in the center. The same symbol she had seen etched into one of the basement jars. Suddenly, she realized the jars weren't just keepsakes. They were anchors, each one tied to someone who had lived and perhaps lost their way in this house, or been remembered by it. Anna stood up slowly, her hands still dusty, and for the first time, she felt the possibility of something she hadn't dared believe since the day she lost everything. That this place, forgotten by time, dismissed by the city, shunned by buyers, might be a place meant for people like her. Not to escape the world, but to understand it differently. To listen. To remember. To make space for what others discard. That night, she placed her own jar on the shelf. It was empty. For now, but she labeled it carefully Anna Barlow, 2023. Still listening. Anna Barlow had lived in the house for nearly 2 weeks. Long enough to learn its silences, long enough to understand its weight. But what surprised her most wasn't the noise. It was the quiet understanding that began to bloom between her and the space around her. It was subtle, like the way the floorboards didn't creak when she walked certain paths, or how the wind never touched the bedroom windows, even when the storms outside raged loud and furious. She no longer kept her suitcase packed. She no longer flinched at knocks. She had stopped wondering whether she would leave. Now she wondered why she had ever arrived. One morning, Anna discovered a hidden drawer beneath the old desk in the basement. Not a typical drawer, this one was built into the underside, nearly invisible unless you ran your fingers along the grain of the wood. Inside it was a cassette tape. No label, no case. Just the tape, worn and slightly warped at the edges. She hadn't seen a cassette player in years, but she remembered the antique store 2 streets over had a shelf of old electronics. Later that afternoon, she traded an old pocket watch she'd found in the attic for a dusty tape deck. That night, as rain curled around the edges of the house, she pressed play and listened. The voice on the tape was old, fragile. A woman's voice, measured, trembling but composed. If you're hearing this, then the house let you find it. A long pause, a soft breath. My name is Edith Langley. This was my home, and I believe it still is. Not in the way people think of ownership, not in papers or taxes or fences, but in memory, in record. Anna leaned in, holding her breath. This house listens, it remembers every joy, every grief, every absence. Another pause. And sometimes it chooses someone. The tape crackled, then went silent. She fast-forwarded. Another voice came in, this time younger, male, barely a whisper. I saw her. I saw Edith. In the hallway. She's not gone. She's waiting. Anna rewound it again. Played it 3 times. And then she sat in the basement for over an hour, staring at the phone, at the wall of clippings, at the quiet jar labeled with her own name. The house had chosen her. But for what? 2 days later, the unexpected arrived not from the house, but from the city. A man knocked on her door just after sunset. Early 60s. Glasses. Windbreaker with a city emblem. His name was Walter Briggs from the Housing Commission. He apologized for the late visit, then handed her an envelope. Cities reviewing properties purchased through the Dollar Home program. He said, "Yours," came up in a flagged report. Anna blinked. Flagged? How? Well, he paused. Technically, it was already condemned. Should have been torn down 3 years ago. No one knows how it ended up back on the list. Honestly, it shouldn't even exist in our system. Anna said nothing. Walter scratched his chin. Place gives me the creeps. To be honest, you really live here. I do. He glanced behind her into the hallway, as if expecting something to move. Then he offered a soft shrug and left without further explanation. That night, the rotary phone rang again. Twice! Anna answered it. No voice. But this time, there was breathing. And then, a whisper. Her name. Anna. The line went dead. Something had shifted. Not just in the house, but in her. She began remembering things that weren't hers. Dreams of people she'd never met. Waking up with names on her lips. Smells from rooms she hadn't entered. The crawl space behind the closet, now it sometimes clicked open on its own. The jars. Sometimes, she'd find the labels changed. Slightly. 1 letter off. 1 name replaced. But perhaps the strangest thing came one cold morning when she stepped into the basement and found a photograph pinned to the wall beside Edith's portrait. It was of Anna, taken from the outside, through the boarded window, black and white. Unmistakably her standing at the basement desk, notebook in hand. No one else had access. She had no visitors, no cameras. On the back of the photo was a handwritten message. This is how it starts, not with fear, but with care. She spent the next days combing every inch of the house, searching for hidden cameras, loose floorboards, anything that could explain it. But all she found were more clues, more forgotten letters, more names etched into beams, more rooms with strange acoustics that echoed only at certain hours. And she began to realize, this house didn't haunt, it preserved people, their edges, their silences. It took the broken, the discarded, and held them like pages between book covers. Some left, some stayed, some vanished. Not in fear, but in surrender. Anna sat at the desk that night and lit a single candle. The power had gone out hours earlier, but she hadn't bothered to fix it. Instead, she picked up the empty jar she had labeled with her name, and for the first time, she placed something inside. A photo of herself creased in the middle, a button from her mother's old coat, and a single sentence written on torn notebook paper. I'm not trying to leave anymore. She sealed it and placed it on the highest shelf. The snow came early that year. By late October, a thin frost had already painted the windows of the little house on Oak Ridge Lane. The street outside remained mostly silent. No children played, no visitors came. To the world. The house was still what it had always been, unwanted, almost invisible. But inside, something had changed. The rooms were still broken, still worn. The basement still smelled of paper and dust. And yet, it breathed differently now. Because Anna Barlow was no longer a guest. She belonged. Not in the way deeds or paperwork defined ownership, but in the quiet way roots settle into soil when no one's looking. Each morning, she lit a candle in the kitchen window, just one. It wasn't for anyone else to see. It was for the house. A quiet greeting, a small ritual, and each evening, before the light disappeared completely. She sat in the armchair downstairs with her notebook, writing. Some days she documented small changes, a shifted floorboard, a new sound, a different name whispering through her dreams. Other days, she simply wrote memories her own, and others, it was no longer clear where hers ended and the house's began. And that no longer frightened her. It grounded her. One day, while repairing a broken hinge on the cellar door, she found a small wooden slat inscribed with a line, nearly sanded away by time. What is remembered? Lives? It stayed with her for days. Because that, she realized, had always been the house's purpose. Not to haunt, not to warn, but to remember what others had forgotten. It had remembered her, long before she ever knew how much of herself had been lost. Weeks passed, then a month. The jars on the shelf grew in number. Some were hers, some weren't. But they all told stories. Not in full, never in full, just in fragments. And that was enough. Because Anna had come to understand most lives weren't grand narratives. They were moments, half-finished sentences, single snapshots, items left behind in pockets and drawers. The house honored them all. Quietly, faithfully. One evening, as snow thickened against the panes and the wind howled low through the trees, Anna found herself standing in the backyard, staring up at the house. From the outside. She hadn't looked at it like this in weeks. The boards were still up. The roof still sagged in one corner. But it no longer looked empty. It looked full. Not of things, but of presence. Of everything that had happened here. And everyone who had refused to be erased. When she stepped back inside, the warmth of the candle greeted her. So did something else. On the desk, beside her notebook, lay a single folded piece of paper. It hadn't been there earlier. Her heart paused, then settled. She opened it. Inside, a short message in the familiar, tight cursive. You stayed, and so will we. No name, no signature. But she didn't need one. Because some things some homes don't speak in names. They speak in presence, in memory, in the sacred act of not turning away. That night, Anna placed a second jar on the shelf. It had no label. Just one object inside. A small key, rusty, still warm to the touch. And she left it there for whoever would come next. Not as a warning, but as a welcome. Anna didn't save the house. The house didn't save Anna. But together, they remembered something no one else had thought to keep. Anna Barlow arrived with the belief that healing required rebuilding, starting over, scrubbing the past clean. But the house taught her something gentler, more profound. That not everything broken needs to be erased. Some cracks hold memory. Some silence carries weight. Some places and people don't need fixing. They need to be seen, remembered, held. The house never asked Anna to change it. It simply asked her not to leave. And in choosing to stay, she found herself again. Not in renovation, but in recognition. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. We share more quiet, powerful moments like this. And if you know someone who believes in second chances, Share it with them. Sometimes, all it takes is staying and listening.